Morning, Bhima.
So for those of you who are joining live, I'm not imagining there's a lot of people right off the bat, but today we have the pleasure of hosting for this interview, Dr. Murali Venkatrao. If you haven't got the pleasure of meeting him, this will be a great first experience. And we have some exciting events that we're helping to spread the word about that he's going to be doing in the new year through Ananda. But just to start off with, Murali, I want to just introduce people, give some context to our time together. Dr. Murali Venkatrao is not only the director of yoga teacher training at the Ananda Institute of Living Yoga here in Bothell in the Seattle area. He's also a professor of yogic physiology at Vivekananda Yoga University and ERYT 500-hour yoga teacher. Born in India, practiced yoga there from the time of 8 years old. And in a former life, software architect at Microsoft. And now yoga is kind of coming, has taken over, right? Is that right, Murali?
Yeah, it started as an avocation, a hobby, and then took over my life.
Amazing.
In a nice way.
Yeah, and that's what we're here to talk about. Maybe we could start off with just your experience. How did your yoga journey begin? When did you I mean, we know it's at 8 years old, but what was that like? How did it take shape?
Well, we were living in a rented house in Bangalore. Bangalore is a city in South India. And one of my brothers, he somehow got the idea that I should practice yoga. I was 8 years old. I didn't know anything. So there was a Hanuman temple very close to my house, and it was set on a hill. And on the top of that hill, every morning, there was a teacher that used to come and teach yoga. So my brother sent me there. I didn't mind it. The only problem was that it was 6:30 in the morning, and for an 8-year-old, that wasn't too good. But I went there anyway. And I ended up liking it. I remember my memories as a child. I thought, oh, maybe I'd like the fresh air, or maybe my mom would give me better breakfast because I had gotten up early. There are all of those little childlike thoughts, but somewhere at a deeper level, it really resonated with me. And much of my yoga practice in India was actually done in such settings, often outside and or within the precincts of a temple or a monastery. There are still a lot of those around in Bangalore. And it was yoga is such a integral aspect of a certain set of people in India. It is of course very well known in all of India, but for a certain set of people, it's such an integral aspect that it didn't feel like I was doing anything esoteric or something that other people didn't do. It was no different from somebody else wanting to go out for a jog. And in fact, in some ways, it was even more natural. And certainly, this was important for me, it was low cost. Even for a jog, you needed a t-shirt, and a polyester t-shirt was not really readily available. Or you needed a pair of sneakers, which really was way above what we could afford. But yoga was whatever you wore and barefoot, and we didn't use yoga mats back then. Even now, I'd say 60–70% of all yoga in India is done without yoga mats. You just go out and practice.
Just on the grass or on the dirt, or
just on the grass, on the dirt, on a concrete floor. And in fact, I have to share this with you. About 2018, I was invited to teach in UK, in London, on International Day of Yoga. It was kind of their official celebration, and they had invited a few teachers, and I had the good fortune of being one of them. And it was behind the Houses of Parliament, and there is a very charming one of those English gardens. It's called the Victoria Garden, and the Thames was on one side, Houses of Parliament on the other. And we just went there, and each of us teachers got a chance to teach. And I didn't take a yoga mat. I don't know how that happened. I just went to teach in England, being an invited yoga teacher, didn't take my yoga mat, and I taught on the grass. And I recall, this is how yoga smelled when I was growing up. It's a very agreeable sensation.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So that leads me to ask, you have a unique perspective, because a lot of us, I first heard about yoga when I was in high school. And my mom found a class in the basement of a church, or else other people, it'll be at a YMCA or if they're fortunate enough to have a yoga studio nearby. What's your experience now, having been in the West so long and seeing yoga practiced here? What are the differences between yoga in the West and yoga as you learned it in India?
Actually, quite a few. Here in the West, yoga is very precise, and I mean that in a good way. When we teach here, we really think about this particular pose. If you have this kind of knee issue, then don't do this. And we are very, very precise. And we also take the time to relate it to other sciences. And intuitively, every yoga teacher here is thinking, I did this pose, it made me feel a little more peaceful. Now, why would that be? Maybe it's because my head is lower than the heart, or maybe because I'm stretching my hips. And there is that wonderful discourse that's going on within a teacher and among teachers and among students. And as a result, many of the unstated benefits of yoga have bubbled up, and it's occupied a special place in the public consciousness. And that's made its way back to India. So in many ways, yoga got exported to the West, got enriched, and those enrichments got re-imported back. And it's a wonderful thing. On the other side, in India, there is, here you have Iyengar yoga, Ashtanga yoga, Vini yoga, power yoga, yin yoga, and of course, what I teach, Ananda yoga, and so on. In India, we just did yoga. It's really I have studied with a direct student of Iyengar, and my brother has studied with Iyengar, and they didn't call it Iyengar yoga. My hometown was the same as Patabi Joyce, who founded Ashtanga and gave us Vinyasa, and they didn't call it Patabi Joyce's yoga. Vinyasa was a technique, Ashtanga was a methodology. In other words, not a way to distinguish. Whereas here, it's probably the mentality of creating a brand or delivering value, where we actually silo what is essentially an integrated practice. And the aspect of that is, and I state this both being a PhD in yoga and teaching yoga to graduate students as a university professor, but also as someone that teaches many hours on the mat, the yoga practice, that we are missing many of the key parts of yoga, because the focus is entirely on asanas, the physical practices. What happens is, when I was taught yoga in India, for example, and the way I practice it even now, is asanas were about one half of what you did. What did you do at other times? You did these practices called purifications. And I don't mean some, standing in front of a fire or anything, not like that. But what would you purify? The most toxic part of our bodies is our bellies. What's in the stomach? So we purify stomach. And there are deep but very accessible practices. They're called bandhas and nauli, kriya, not kriya yoga kriya, but purification kriya. That's a very important part of yoga. The other part, pranayama, the breathing practices in many ways are the crown jewel of hatha yoga. And it's not an exaggeration to say that your asana practice is merely a preparation for controlling your inner vitality. That's what pranayama means. controlling the inner vitality. And in fact, without the pranayama, asana practices is really not that meaningful. I mean, they have a lot of benefits, but it's really like eating the appetizer and not the main course. So you got the purifications and pranayama and mudras and bandhas. So what's the difference between this particular way of holding your hand? If I move my chair back, I sit like this, or I sit like this, or I sit like this. What is the difference? I sit like this. What happens when you do an asana like this versus doing it like this? Are they meaningful, or are they not? And it turns out that they are very meaningful. And where you place your hand when you do a yoga pose, and you bend forward and touch your, come down, what you do with your hands, what you do with your gaze, they're all very, very important. They are called mudras. So when you combine all of these purifications and the asanas themselves and the mudras and the locks, when you hold your breath, you bring your chin to your chest. Is that important? And if so, why? Who should do it? Who shouldn't do it? That's called a bandha. Jalandhara bandha. Jala means a net. And there is a net of nadis, meaning meridians, right here. And we lock that net to hold the energy right here. So something like that is very inward, and when done at the end of a asana practice, has a great inner meaning, which the consciousness knows. So where I'm going with this is, when I practiced yoga in India, these were all part and parcel of what I was taught. A teacher wouldn't think of excluding any of those. And now here, this is not always the case, but more often than not, we have, if a class is an hour and 20 minutes and you remove 10 minutes for shavasana, and in the remaining 70 minutes, we do 60 minutes of asana and then kind of do some of these as an adjunct. And thereby we only touch the tip of the iceberg and miss the depth of benefits that you might get from it. So I guess that's a bit of a long-winded answer, Bhima, to your question. How are things different?
Well, it sounds like it's quite different. And I mean, that leads me to think or to wonder, how is it that you've come to practice Ananda Yoga? Did you find some kind of a compatibility with what you had begun to learn in India with that practice?
Yes, I found it to be very representative. And instead of in India and non-India, let me just say, Hatha Yoga's original intention, the set of yogic practices is called Hatha Yoga, as you well know. And Hatha it of course refers to the solar, the lunar and the solar aspects, fire and light, if you will. That is the duality within us. But it also, in regular Indian languages, in my language, for example, Hatha means obstinacy, doing something despite being told not to, or despite not wanting to. And I know you have a young son, so you know what Hatha means. And so why apply that term? It's because the nature of the body, this thing that I can touch and feel, the nature of that is to be still. Not to be still, but to be unmoving. It's inertia. If the mind gives me no reason to get up tomorrow morning, the body by itself will not get up. You see what I'm saying? So similarly, the mind is the opposite. It will never stop moving. So the body doesn't want to move and the mind doesn't stop moving. But every definition of health and well-being and spirituality requires us to be the opposite, that the body is filled with vitality and always ready to move, and the mind is filled with calmness and gets stop moving at will. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I never heard that before.
Yeah. So hatha refers to the fact that we have to be obstinate using our willpower and make the body move and make the mind still. So that's why it's called hatha yoga. Eventually, it happens all by itself, because the soul's natural place is for the physical form to be filled with vitality and the consciousness to be filled with stillness. But initially, it needs hatha. It needs obstinacy for us to do it. So for that, you just cannot work with the body. You have to work with the mind through the medium of the breath. So where I was going with all of that is when I first encountered Ananda Yoga, this was right there, the very first class that I took. And I read this wonderful book by Swami Kriyananda. It's called The Art and Science of Raja Yoga. I saw all of this for the first time outside of India. That the practices did yoga poses, of course, they were the heart and soul of it, but we did pranayama, and we brought the mind into it. We said, I just won't do the pose, I will feel the pose. And in feeling, I'll do it deeper. In doing it deeper, I'll feel it more in a more sensitized way, and so on. And then we worked with energy directly. So we did these mudras, we did these locks, we did pranayamas. So they were all, it really felt like, and it is closer to the original intent of hatha yoga, the make the body move and make the mind still, so that you can meditate, so that the effects of chronic stress will go down, so that anxiety, insomnia, depression will go down, and on and on. The body can begin to heal. So that's what attracted me to Ananda Yoga, that a recognition that it is closer to the essence of what hatha yoga is supposed to be.
Got it. And just in terms of, I just wanted to take a moment and plug some of the things you're doing through the Ananda Institute. January 15th, yoga teacher training is starting up, right?
Well, the yoga teacher training itself is now starting in September.
Oh,
and this
okay.
is very, very late breaking news.
Okay, great.
And but mainly because we did want to offer the choice that for those that want to, they can come face to face and take it with us.
Got it.
But it's in September. It's going to be it'll be 6 weekends. It will start in right after Labor Day, and then right after Thanksgiving, and we meet about 6 times during that time. But you can also take it fully online. So that is one, and I'll talk more about that soon. But what is beginning in January, however, is the art and science of Raja Yoga. And what that is remember I just said that you do these asanas, you do the pranayama, you do the purifications, and you do the mudras and the bandhas. But to what end? Well, you can ask for a physical benefit at the end of it, and certainly there is a lot of it. But the much deeper endpoint or outcome, as we say in science circles, is that you are able to meditate. I have, and I'm sure you have, so many people saying, I'd love to meditate, but I just cannot sit still and focus my mind. And my answer usually is, if you were able to sit still and focus your mind, you don't need to meditate because you already are. The reason you want to learn to meditate is to precisely get that ability. So what we do is we take these techniques of hatha yoga that I just talked about and add to it the meditation component. Therefore, it turns from Hatha Yoga, which is the path of obstinacy, or the path of willpower, applied to the body and the breath, and we take it into meditation, which is the path of willpower applied to the consciousness. And the benefits, of course, as you and your viewers know, they are enormous. So that is a 11-week course. We meet every Thursday from 6 to 9 p.m. And we don't assume any prior knowledge or any prior ability. But by the end of the course, we will have you meditating for just about an hour. And everybody is able to do it. And you know, Bhima, because you yourself have taught that course in the past.
The cat's out of the bag. It really is. It's a great course. And, even, I don't know how many times I've taken it and then started teaching it, for several years. And it's one of those things that I sometimes, my mind plays tricks on me, and I look and I say, was this book edited just since the last time I did the class? Because there's new things that come up every time. Yeah. Is that online and in person, or just online?
It's also online and in person.
Okay.
And the book that Bhima just spoke about is this one, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga. Sorry for the mirror image. I'm sure you should be.
Oh no, it looks good.
Oh, I see. Okay. So this is, the entire science of yoga, what I just explained, but much, much more. The entire science of yoga is contained in this, what is probably a 2,700-year-old little book called Yoga Sutras. Sutra means little aphorisms. Think of those as Zen-like sayings. And the entire Yoga Sutras, if I wrote it down in Sanskrit, it would be about this page, no more. The entire science of yoga is contained in it. But of course, it is tremendously deep. So for example, if you picked what it had to say about pranayama, it says something like this. I'll say this in Sanskrit first. It says, Tasmin sati shwasa prashwasa gati vichedaha pranayama. Tasmin sati shwasa prashwasa gati vichedaha pranayama. So you heard the word pranayama there, meaning it's defining pranayama. And what it is saying is shwasa, inhalation, prashwasa, exhalation, gati, rhythm, vicheda, breaking, pranayama, meaning as soon as we inhale, we want to exhale. As soon as we exhale, we want to inhale, and so on. We've been doing that since we cried out the first time after emerging from the womb. So Patanjali, the author of Yoga Sutras, he says, learn after inhalation to not want to exhale right away. And even more importantly, learn after exhalation to not want to inhale right away. When you break that rhythm, a magical thing happens. Your energy enters into a place where the mind disconnects from the instinctive need to breathe, meaning the breath comes under our control. And then what happens? The mind becomes still. So he says, and therefore the veil that covers the inner light becomes thinner. Be still and know that I am. They all come from the same source. But anyway, where I'm going with all of that is, this book is probably the best commentary on the Yoga Sutras that I have ever come across. And I really like the way you characterize it. I've taught this course probably around 25 times now. And I bet if I open the book today to give a class on it, I'll see something I didn't see before. That's the nature of sutras. That's, it's one of those Zen-like sayings. People have meditated on it for lifetimes. But nonetheless, that's what the upcoming course is on. You learn asanas, pranayamas, mudras, bandhas, meditation, Vedanta, Yoga Sutras, all that stuff and more.
Mm-hmm. So you really get, from what I've experienced, from that course is you really get a sense, and you know it, in yourself, that you're experiencing the totality of yoga, of how it was meant to be, and how it can be integrated into your life, and not just, like you said, it's no longer just like jogging, something that I do for a certain period of time and then I go home, but it's something that well, like what has happened to you, that takes over.
Takes over. It goes from something that I do to something that I am.
Right.
And it's meaningful in a very fundamental way, that you begin to see shadows of the yogic lifestyle behind almost everything that you do.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And one thing before we go, because we don't have a lot of time together, obviously, if you want to have, isn't there a Raja open house coming up where people can, it's more pointed towards Raja? Is that still going?
We have none scheduled, but there will be one in the new year.
Okay.
And I'm sure, and when it comes, it'll be on anandawashing.org and in other places too. But just as a reminder, Bhima, that you and I are, or I am doing another event.
It's a second Saturday in January, I think it is. What is it, the 8th?
It was January 8th.
Yeah.
And it will be you using yogic practices to awaken Kundalini. And it's all about that great source of energy that lies at the base of our spine. And in fact, Hatha Yoga pushes the Kundalini from below, and Raja Yoga attracts it from above. And I'll talk about all of that. There's many
brilliant,
fascinating things to explore there.
So we can go deeper into that with the event that we're doing in January, and it's just a couple of weeks before it starts. So that's a great time to spend more time with Murali, especially if you're interested in doing the course. One thing I wanted to mention too that's kind of fun is that Murali has a series of what have become viral YouTube videos of different stories from India's great reservoir of epic tales and poetry. And so I encourage you to check that out on YouTube. I'm not going to link it in the description on this video, but you can just copy and paste the name into YouTube and you'll see it. There's quite a few of them actually. And I know, maybe that's something that might pop up as a teaser during Raja. I can't imagine spending, 3 months with Murali and not having an epic story come up. So
not one, we'll have several.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, that's great. Well, Murali, thanks for taking this time with us this morning. And just as a recap, it's January 20th is when, on every Thursday is when Raja starts up. Before that, a couple Saturdays prior to that, we'll have an event with him that we're hosting through East West, which you can register for. And also check the description of the video because we do have the link to anandawashington.org. It's ANANDA, anandawa.org. And that'll do it for now, Murali. Thank you so much for just sharing your experience of yoga practice. And we hope that everybody who's interested can follow up with us later.
Thank you for having me, Bhima. It's a pleasure as always, whether I speak to you on Zoom or in person.
Thanks, Murali. All right, take care, everyone.